excited to be here. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. We're going to discuss all things founding a company in the age of AI and general tips from 7 years of starting one of the most successful AI companies that Europe has to offer. I'm Judith. I'm a general partner at Visionaries Club. We invest at the early stages in the best European tech companies. I was lucky enough to join the journey of Parloa a couple of years ago as an investor. And so, Stefan, can you talk a little bit about what Parloa does and what brought you here?
First of all, thanks for being here. It's really exciting to share some of the stories, hopefully be able to help you along that way. So what is it with Parloa we do? We are passionate to make people's lives easier, and not everywhere, but specifically in the part where we communicate with other companies. So we all probably know that frustration. You have a problem and you need to reach out to customer service. You think twice about this because you will be in a line for 10 minutes and you're just gonna hate it, right? So until you really reach out, you will have a high frustration because customer service really sucks. And this is really where we started, where how can we help these people? How can we make that life easier? And then on the other side, we all know that chatbot experience where you're like, oh, what's the fastest way I get through this menu to eventually get help from a real person, right? This sucks as well. But then you ask people about the ChatGPT experience and they smile. And this is exactly what we're up to. We're bringing the AI agents to customer service, make that experience enjoyable, nice, so you have your personal agent which can serve you, knows you, gets your context, and actually gets your problem solved in a timely manner. So you can get to the stuff which you actually care about, which is probably not waiting in line for customer service.
I love the enthusiasm that you have for customer service. I wish every founder was as passionate about that subject as you are. I can literally feel it right here. Let's talk a little bit about competition. You know, you're founding a company in the age of AI. Competition has never been as fierce as it is right now. You know, there's like new entrants left, right, front and center. AI is famously a technology that brings down the barriers for starting anything. So how has your view on competition maybe evolved since you started Parloa 8 years ago to today?
Yeah, you touched many interesting topics. Maybe just pick out one. So, of course, we were also super tiny in the beginning, right? So this is how you start. That's a startup, right? And then I still remember the first time we had that massive pitch against at a customer, and it was against Google. And you like, at that time we were like 15 people. And the last thing you want when you are 15 people is to compete against Google. And that's how I was feeling about it. But then you go on, and we were in that pitch, and it was actually a nice one because it wasn't about pitching, but it was about demonstrating value in front of customers. So each of the vendors had 3 days in front of customers, and they were able to demonstrate, do they deliver or not? And as we learned afterwards, we were far ahead. And because I think what really boils down to is because we were not obsessed with what do other competitors have, like what's the feature matrix look like, and do I need to check all these boxes? But instead, we were informed about that, but we did focus on the customers. What do they care about? What do they need to be successful? Relentlessly going in, talking with them, looking at the numbers, checking in. And that pays off. So even when we were this 15-people company, we won against Google. It was actually a selling agent, and we had a 10% better performance than them. So it was not like a tiny leap, but it was massive. And so I think the key learning, I think, was for us, yes, it feels natural to be afraid of other competitors. And there's always somebody who is more hyped than you are, who has more attention, who has whatever better press, has a better narrative. And that's good to know and to recognize, while for yourself, focus just on your customers, relentlessly going in there. And I think that's the biggest learning.
I think it's beautiful that you touch on that, because from the investor's perspective, I think this is one of the biggest things where people underestimated Parloa. I remember back in the day when we started doing diligence on the company, you know, and you were kind of, you know, speaking to other people on the team and other funds. They were all like, but Parloa is going up against Amazon. They're going up against Google. Like, there's no way a startup from Berlin is going to be in the mid to long term be able to, you know, fight against these huge behemoth customers in one of the core technological areas that they're focused on. And then to your point, I remember actually talking to a customer in the teleshopping area, or they were, I think, not yet a customer, but they were about to become a customer. And we spoke to them as a customer reference, and they said exactly what you said. They said, we've done these big studies, we've kind of benchmarked 5 different solutions, and Parloa just clearly came out on top. And that was such a strong data point and such a strong vote of confidence. So I think your radical obsession on excellence and on customer focus just really has paid off. Yeah. Can you maybe...
and maybe just double down on this, because we know each other from different angles, right? Now you see us on stage, and actually we're quite good connected, but we also, there was an initial phase where we get to know each other from a startup and a VC side, right? And of course also there, the easy, VCs always ask for easy answers, right? That's how the nature is. And if you can explain it, that's much easier. So if there is, of course, always that question about, well, so what's the one single thing which makes you completely unique, which is at best defensible, even though, of course, you're still small, but this is what they look at. It makes sense, right? I mean, they need to argue it in front of their investor board. And then it's not necessarily easy if you say, well, you know, I mean, because that's the reality is, if you go on a and really address your customers, you need to make that entire experience smooth. And you really need to tune every little knot that the overall chain works successfully. But what investors want, they want that one answer, that one element in the chain, and make that successful. So of course, while I still advocate in reality to focus massively on your customers and make sure that chain works, I think it is also helpful to be customer-centric when you talk to VCs and look at what is really unique in your chain, and in that narrative, highlight one thing, which for us, for example, when we got together, it was really making sure the voice is unique. And we're still making sure that the voice experience is top-notch, and while it sounds so easy that they're just understood, and the flow with latency and all that emotional recognition works well, that is still the core, but just you always need to highlight that one thing in that customer-centric view. So I think this changes a bit. So what I would recommend using for real life, and what I would recommend using when you talk with VCs.
I think it's hilarious because obviously, you know, I mean, it's good that we're roasting VCs. We're supposed to be roasting VCs because, you know, there's many things that I think we can still improve on as kind of an industry. But I think one of the things is that many founders, you know, kind of oftentimes share that the way that VCs ask questions about their business and the kinds of easy answers that they're looking for, it's not at all how they would look at, you know, kind of the questions that they would be asking when they were sitting in the other seat. And so always the biggest compliment that I get as a VC is if a founder says, that's exactly the way that I would have thought about diligencing this business. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, I'm doing something right. But so maybe on that note, you know, as Parloa, you've raised, you know, kind of hundreds of millions in funding. I mean, this is as crazy a fundraising environment as it gets. We're seeing companies in Silicon Valley raising $1 billion, you know, kind of off the bat. So how has your view on fundraising evolved? Like, what are your biggest, you know, kind of fundraising tips also to the founders in the audience that you've learned over time?
Yeah, it's a really important element of having a startup, right? So, and I think the worst thing you can do is just over time, one VC, have a chat here, have a chat there, and then you look opportunistically, will something evolve? And I don't think it will, because that's not how I see a momentum coming up. So what I would recommend is instead, or how we're doing this, treating it as a process which you really need to show excellence in. And you need to time compress it into a really short period of time. So you get everything ready, all the material, all the DD stuff, you know, all numbers, all contracts, your entire pitch decks, everything ready. You line up all the conversations in 1 week. And before that, this week will be a just pitching week, like 30 meetings. The entire week will be full of it. And you will have that one pitch. So I can recommend, and that's where your existing investors come in, before you do that, double check that message. And that's also where you really see that relationship with investors. They have that other angle, that view. You challenge it with them. What do you think of this story, this storyline? Like, essentially, what do you highlight of your company? And how do you communicate the positioning you're in? And then you are at the week. I mean, this is an intense week, I can tell you. But it gets the momentum going. So everybody knows you are raising right now. And it's helpful for you because you need to have them all in a similar stage, right? You want to advance them about at the equal timing, so they're all in a similar moment when they take decisions. Because once they give you a term sheet, they're not going to wait for a month until you figure out other opportunities. So you need to have them all aligned in that one moment when you have term sheets, so you can then really get the momentum and go through. So what we've seen, week 1, first meeting, high level, week 2, dive deep on the commercial side and technical side for those who are more interested. If this is more interesting, mid that week, share your data room, and then third week you are already into negotiations, term sheets, and the third or fourth week you should be in term sheets, and that was what has been really helpful for us to streamline that process really quickly.
I love what you said about kind of pitching beforehand or dry pitching. Something that we did at our funds is if you were the one, let's say you backed a company at pre-seed and you were intimately familiar with that company, and then that company a year later was going out to raise their seed, we would have them pitch to our investment team, but not the ones who were familiar with the company and working with them, but actually the people closest from the deal. Because I think that's something that founders really underestimate. I mean, typically you have, let's face it, half an hour to convince VCs of your story, and really the first 5 to 10 minutes matter. I always say as a VC, there's the types of founders, and I think you did that beautifully, just now on stage, where you sit a little bit more upright, like your attention, you're like leaning into the conversation, even if it's a Zoom, and it's because the storytelling, and this isn't necessarily like extroversion versus introversion, but there's just something about how they're presenting the business, how they're presenting the insights, how they're presenting their view on the world that really catches your attention. And oftentimes, if you pitch your company to people who know your company, who know all the details, you're not going to be able to kind of get the feedback of like, hold on, like that doesn't quite make sense yet. And so I always recommend like pitch to people who basically know nothing about you, and they're going to be the right proxy in terms of fine-tuning your pitch to something that is really digestible and is going to be kind of easy enough to understand in the first 5 minutes of a pitch.
Yeah, and I think also you see how the relationship changes over time, right? Initially, on the first funding round, you don't have anybody in your team, but over the funding rounds, you have a team, and you have that dedicated persona you sell to, which is different than when you sell your product, but the investors, they have different. So that new person in your team, which you kind of have married in a way, right? You are now in that boat together. They help you to understand that view, that side, right? Because they're on the other side every day. And so that collaboration beforehand is all of a sudden becomes a team effort. And of course, challenging each other in a nice way, but of course, bluntly, and let's make sure we're successful is super important. And so relationships change over time.
Absolutely. Let's switch gears a little bit. You have a technical background. You're obviously working at the forefront of AI. Parloa was started in 2018. 2018, I mean, it almost feels like the Stone Ages now compared to where we are today. It feels like we've gone through like 100 years of progress in a very, very short period of time. So just looking at like the job of a software developer, kind of, software developing overall, we've got obviously Codex, we've got Claude, we've got Cursor, and many, many other tools that folks are using to leverage and kind of give them superpowers. Can you explain a little bit how, kind of coding agents or AI for coding has changed the way that you do your job, the way that you work at Parloa over time?
Yeah, I mean, it probably everybody who develops knows like the world is flipping upside down at the moment. This is wild. All the job we used to have, it's a completely new job. And it's exciting, though, because all of a sudden, you can deliver so much more. So also as an early stage startup where you needed money quite early because you need to build something, now you can build it alone. Or with just 2 or 3 people, you can get quite far because the AI is doing so much work. And so that means also for us, we need to reinvent how we work. And for us, as I guess the model we internally have is, so first, developers start with autocomplete, the tab completion, and then get some help with AI. Then you switch to the agent mode where you monitor, you're human in the loop, but the AI is building most of it, but you still just interacting with your agent. Then you notice, that my workflows actually goes beyond just coding, right? I need to get the user needs, my requirements, my documentation somewhere else, so you integrate it further in the software development lifecycle, and then you notice, oh, actually that machine is running quite nicely, and I mean, it's not that fast, right? It still takes time, so you have waiting time, so while I wait, I can actually just already get the next one starting, so all of a sudden you don't have just one machine running, but you start to have multiple ones running. And then what we see as the last step is actually, because it is helpful to get them into a certain shape, right? So you don't take we use a lot of Cloud Code. You don't just use the native Cloud Code, but you adapt it to your needs. You improve, like, as we call it, like recipes, skills to make that capability better. So then you actually build more the machines building the other machines. So this is essentially the journey we see also internally, the developers going through, and we I think really embrace it, and it's nice, it's fun. So actually for us, it has become a cultural shift. So initially there was some you hold back a bit, especially some seniors, because they have been successful their entire life in building code, and all of a sudden building code is not unique anymore. So there was some, until you get to know this. And so there was some really great people in our team who just were role models, because they were not like pushing, but they're inspiring. They're showing, look, I mean, coding is fun, absolutely, but look at that. All of a sudden you have a jetpack on. So, and then by showing this, by leading the way, by making hackathons to just try it out, where you see hands-on yourself, oh, actually, without high risk, this is really great, and it does reliable software. There was a massive shift. So for us, we call it, we're cooking, right? So we're in the kitchen, we're cooking, we have the recipes, and so there's quite some memes around in the company. So there's also that positive cultural change going on, and it's so much fun. I think it is so much fun. We're having a good time. Love to embrace this further. In the last 6 months, our throughput has tripled, and we're just getting started, right? I mean, we have so many improvements recently. So I think like within a year we'll at least 10x the speed. And this is what an amazing time to be alive and really work in such an environment. So yeah, it's really, really great. And I think opens up for, just going back to these young startups, when you're a small team, you can deliver so much more now, right? You can go much further in your startup life cycle with so much little. So it's giving less money, so it opens up, I think, entirely new businesses opportunities, like how you can start without massive funding. So it's really unique time, I think, to build a startup.
Yeah, I think that agency and the jetpack that you refer to, the superpowers that are being given to every founder, I think we're seeing that in the numbers, right? I mean, if anyone's been to Silicon Valley lately, it's crazy to see how early founders skew, right? I think the median age in YC is now 24 years old. There's lots of like 19, 20-year-old founders starting companies because of exactly what you're describing. There's the lean leaderboard of like, when are we going to get to the first $1 billion one-person company? So I think there's a lot of that, which is so exciting. There's an influx of talent. Everyone's, kind of like absolutely excited to be starting a company. What maybe, if we kind of flip that coin, what would you still say in the midst of like all of this progress and like how much agency people have gained? What are parts of the founder journey or building a startup that are maybe still underestimated? It's become so much easier over here, but what are things that are still pretty hard, from your perspective of starting a company that maybe people should pay more attention to?
I guess starting a company or growing a company, and as you probably all know, there are many phases, and each one is challenging. So if I would pick one, I think, which is maybe more underestimated, is building the team, right? You start out with that vision. Vision usually is about the product, the value proposition you have. But the reality is there are people making that possible. And yes, I don't know, you might be the founder and you might have your co-founder and maybe you're 3 or 4, but you don't win because there are these 3 people. You win because there's an entire team making that happen. And so the importance of team, I think, is often underestimated. And that means to grow that team, you have 2 parts. You need to develop the existing team. You need to become a team. And you need to bring the greatest talent on board. And that's not easy, right? I mean, there are other great companies out there, and you might not be known at all. So this is really, I think, a underestimated activity, attracting the best talent, making sure you get into a relationship with them, you know what you need, what good looks like, and you can identify that in these few moments you have with new candidates. So I think recruiting is a quite underestimated activity of startups. but as it's the end, the people, I think, super essential.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because at the end of the day, it's just intensely human. So even if you can automate the entire kind of applicant tracking system, all the workflows around it, at the end of the day, it's people meeting people, and that's where the rubber meets the road. So no matter how much AI and kind of transformation we have, that's something that you'll always have to convince and convert, like with people in the room, and kind of win them over for your startup. Is that the hardest lesson that you've had as a founder over the last 7 years, or what would you say was like the single hardest lesson that you learned over that journey?
Yeah, I guess there are many lessons. When you do many mistakes, you learn a lot, right? That's how everybody will see their journey. The single hardest lesson, I think what was the hardest step for us was, our industry is massively changing. And so when we started, the industry looked different. What you did was you recognized what people are saying, you mapped that into a state machine, into a graph, and then you had this rigid chatbot-style interactions, which was the only way what is possible at that moment, but it was terrible. And so I was always looking, how can we make that better? And eventually there was the InstructGPT paper from OpenAI, which mapped out how you can build agents, how you can use tools to accomplish more. And the reality was, of course, these models weren't really good enough to do this, but it painted a vision. And for us, this was super inspiring because for the first time, we could see how the reality we want to have could unfold. And so I think the biggest decision there was to rethink how we solve that customer problem, double down on the agentic agent way, disrupting ourselves, essentially, even though we had a product which was tripling revenue every year already. So there wasn't like a market need to change it, but it was clear you have to believe, or we thought we need to believe in our vision to make it better for the customers, make it more successful. And I think, and that was the biggest turn for us. Now everything unfolded afterwards from there on. And so disrupting ourselves turned out to be the right decision. So the biggest lesson, I think, is trust in yourself. You know this better than anybody else out there, better than your investors, better than your customers. They know their problem better than you do, but you know you can imagine the solution base better than they have. And I think getting that confidence and, of course, trying to de-risk it, but trust in yourself is, I think, in the end, the key lesson for me.
I love that. And I think you don't nearly give yourselves enough credit for that. Like being able to disrupt something that works in a phase where you're still growing in a market that's as crazy as this market. I think it's like one of the single biggest achievements that I've seen companies, kind of achieve over the last 10 years of having been in this industry. So huge kudos for having been able to do that transformation. Maybe to end, let's zoom out. So we talked about coding agents, we talked about fundraising, we talked about all the hard lessons. We're kind of on the back of 2025. It's going to be a new year soon. What are the major trends that you're seeing? What's your advice to founders? What are focus areas that they should have? Can you talk us a little bit through your kind of playbook maybe for 2026?
Okay, this is just my view, so you will have your insights. But my hunch is models are solid. Large language models, they're good. They're not perfect, they're not AGI, but they're great. And you can, when you put them in the right setting, deliver so much value. So I think what will happen next year will be a verticalization of agents, bringing real value to customers through these agents. So I really advocate double down on the application layer of agents, make them successful in one domain, prove your point. I think then the second thing is agents in their form will change. Right now they're reactive, right? You give them something and then they do something else. And I think the first step will then be they become the background worker for you. They watch what's going on in the market and inform you. They look at how your system is running. They are proactive. They're real skilled workers doing a job autonomously, and not just because when you ping them, but because they are proactive. And then let's see how far we get next year, but then maybe the year after that. I think the entire ecosystem of agents will gain much more traction. So the entire agent-to-agent communication, because there will be an entire work fleet of agents, and so they will have a bit parallel universe and talk with each other, delivering together even more value. But first, I think we need to get that initial point of having these successful agents in a more spread out way. I think that's my hunch. So I still believe agents are the big change, and I work with these models every day. I'm confident they're good enough to do most of this value creation we can leverage right now.
Vertical agents, don't be afraid to disrupt yourself. And the best thing you can do is have trust in what you believe, because no one knows your market as well as you do. I hope that was great advice from a great founder. Thank you so much. And
thank you.